Hi, I'm Mark Honeybone from Property Ventures, and welcome to our weekly podcast where we interview prominent members of the investment community along with other professionals in the New Zealand property market. This is a free service from Property Ventures so that you can keep current and learn from some of the best around New Zealand. To check us out, take a look at propertyventures.co.nz. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. So welcome back, and what's happening in the world? Well, there's only one thing at the moment, isn't it? Everyone's talking about, and that's Mr. Donald Trump, the new president of the United States of America, and everyone's talking about what is it going to have, what effect is it going to have on us over here in New Zealand with trading and finances and property. Well, the good news is the sun did come up this morning, the morning after the election. And what I thought I'd do today is get a chap called Matthew Blackwell. He's the CEO of OMF here in Auckland, and he has extensive knowledge in the finance world, trading in currency. And he would be a perfect person, I thought, to get along today to talk about it. He's in the media a lot, with the best media in the country trying to get hold of him to talk about these sorts of topics. So if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for Property Ventures to get Matt along. So sit back and we'll see what we can learn from Matthew in the next 20 minutes or so. So welcome along to the show, Matt.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here.
So, Matt, just so listeners know who you are, they've never probably heard of you. Some might have, you never know. Tell us a bit about your business and what you do. And I know we're just down the road from us in Newmarket. You've just, I believe, I'm here, sitting here in your office now looking over the Brickmart.
Yeah, sure, Mark. So I'm the CEO of a firm here called OMF, OM Financial. We're a multi-product broker-dealer. We're involved in all sorts of markets, equities, futures, foreign exchange trading for retail individuals and wholesale clients. We do import-export foreign exchange for companies that are small, medium-sized companies, and we deal with very large institutional clients that do dairy futures. We're very active in carbon. We basically, if it's a financial product that's tradable in the market, we're typically involved in it. So, yeah, and as you said, I mean, we're now centred locally here in Britomart, so we're right above the Tiffany store down in Galway Street here, and a great setup, lovely old heritage building, and a great office for clients to be able to get in here and meet with us and have chats like this. So, a great setup. We've also got an office in Wellington, and earlier this year we received our AFSL from ASIC, and we've opened up in Sydney, and we've got a team of people doing exactly the same, but in Australia. So interesting business, and clearly interesting times in financial markets.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe when you opened up here a couple of weeks, Mr. John Keys was here.
Yeah, it was great. We had the Prime Minister that came down, and we had about 90 staff and clients in the cafeteria here and in the boardroom where we're sitting now, and the Prime Minister, it was great for us. I mean, it's a real marquee building, a marquee site, and it sent a real statement for the business that we have good connections, and the function went really well, and the client feedback was fantastic. So
great stuff. I know the money market's what you do and what you love, and you've just come back after about 10 or 15 years over Singapore way, doing some important jobs over there. So let's talk the US election and bits that are going on here. And just even this morning, the Reserve Bank had their latest chat to the public and dropped I think by 0.25. And you were saying before they're even promising potentially less than that. So tell your thoughts on that to start with.
Yeah, well, it's been a pretty interesting 24 hours. That's fair to say. I mean, the US election, I think that even the casual observer has been gobsmacked by what's been going on. Not just with the primaries, but also with the actual presidential campaign. It's sort of unprecedented. And I think, the markets were obviously a bit concerned about the potential of a Trump presidency, but most people in this part of the world seem to think that was a fairly ludicrous scenario and that sense would prevail. And just like we saw with Brexit, a month or two ago, the efficiency of poll data has really been questioned now. Now, I don't have the answers as to why that is, whether it's the technology revolution we've gone through and how people communicate and swap preferences and ideas. But clearly, again, Brexit wasn't meant to happen, and the market got blindsided by that. Yesterday morning on Betfair, the betting agency, a Trump presidency was $10. Would have paid you $10 to get out a bet for that, and a Clinton presidency would have was at $1.10. So that tells you sort of where and I always think it's interesting to look at the betting odds because that's really where people are placing their hard earned. So outside of polls, so when you see betting odds and polls line up, you know that it's pretty good. But the market, the odds couldn't have got it wrong. I even heard that there was an Irish bookmaker that paid out somewhere around the vicinity of about £5 million sterling on bets for Clinton to be the president early because they thought it was such a foregone conclusion. So.
Good Irish story.
Yeah, you couldn't have scripted that one better if you tried, but clearly there'll be a few less potatoes in the pot tonight somewhere in Dublin, I'd imagine. But it just goes to show that this event and this outcome was completely unexpected, and we saw the impact of that sort of on the markets last night. Equity markets in particular globally got absolutely smashed. Interest rates in the US rallied, and I guess if you're sitting there listening to the same, why would the market reacted that way? Well, one is on uncertainty. Markets never like uncertain events, and a Trump presidency, even as we sit here now, is still a pretty uncertain sort of proposition as to what it's going to ultimately deliver. But at the time, it was because it was so unexpected. You really did see sort of panic and chaos. It really sort of went through till late last night New Zealand time, and I guess it was really sort of when Trump came out and had that acceptance speech and was more conciliatory in nature and less of the sort of lock her up and drain the swamp type rhetoric that the market got a little bit of confidence that maybe he won't be so crazy and equity markets recovered. But look, I think it's way too early to tell.
The one thing I was very pleased after I watched about 4 hours of the news and election last night. And I was going, come on, Trump, you have to do a good, winning speech. And as you said, he did that, and that's what could possibly help all the markets around the world. And I don't know the share market at all. I assume that's, by the sounds of it, what has it sort of stabilised today. I never sort of heard that. So what has happened today, along with the Reserve Bank announcement today?
Yeah, well, look, equity markets rallied into the US close, which is about 11 a.m. in the morning time, New Zealand time. So, the day finished pretty positively in the US. So, certainly, as you alluded to, the market took heart from, Trump being presidential for a change. So there we go.
Not saying what he thought.
Exactly, yeah. So we'll see how long that lasts. But certainly the market took comfort from the way he spoke and what he said. And the equity markets liked it, rallied and finished, actually strong on the day, which, was quite phenomenal given how far down they were at one point during the US trading day. And that sort of continued. If you look at sort of Asian equity markets, Australian markets, by and large, they've followed that lead. And because if you remember, they were the first signs of the polls yesterday. This time yesterday, we were starting to think the unthinkable, and markets were starting to react accordingly. So they've played a little bit of catch up today. The main thing today was, as you talked about earlier, was the Reserve Bank of New Zealand cutting interest rates by 25 basis points down to 175. Really interesting that they would do that. For a lot of your listeners, I'm sure they've seen that, the dairy prices in New Zealand have recovered. The data around immigration has remained, pretty good. Inflation data, while, definitely below the bottom end of the band for the Reserve Bank, had with the revisions, it had shown a little bit of an uptick. So, you could argue that there wasn't actually the need to cut interest rates, but clearly the Reserve Bank are concerned about two things. One is the fact that the track of inflation is well below the bottom end of their band, and that because it's been below it for so long, that inflation expectations, which are really key, which is how you and I and your listeners think about forward inflation, once those expectations are anchored that prices aren't going up, it can be quite destructive for an economy. So that's why they acted today. One, because of inflation expectations and the fact they're below the band, and two, because they genuinely believe the currency is too high, which has been a common theme the whole way through this rate cutting cycle. The problem you've got, and the problem that they've got, is that in a world where everyone's close to zero interest rates, in New Zealand, where you've got very low inflation and you've got interest rates, or now today at 1.75, the real rate of return, and the real rate is the nominal interest rate, being 175 less the inflation rate. So what you're really getting in your hand for the return on your money after inflation is still one of the highest in the world. You've got US rates, and in many countries you've got flat inflation and negative rates. It's actually costing you money to be in the bank. So what they're trying to do there is drive activity into more productive asset classes and create inflation. So in New Zealand, the economy is doing pretty well. Interest rates for New Zealand, New Zealand history are very, very low, historically low now. But our inflation is lower than where the bottom end of the band. And if you remember, the Reserve Bank, their mandate is to maintain inflation within the band. And the fact that it's been below the band for a period of time is why they cut rates today, because they know they can they can take that chance that they can get a little bit of forward inflation from lower rates and hopefully bring down the Kiwi dollar, which unfortunately for them didn't actually happen today. The Kiwi dollar certainly over the most part of the day was sort of unchanged to slightly higher. It's actually starting to come a little bit lower now, but that's and if you look at these sort of how you sort of draw, if you can sort of try and draw these international events together, you've got what does a Trump presidency mean? Well, we don't really know what that's going to mean, but certainly if he follows through on even a quarter of what he's said he's going to follow through on, it's pretty uncertain, right? So, one of the big things, I guess, for us, that we've had people burning rubbish bins in the street around TPPA. Well, he's sort of clearly has signalled that that's not going to see the light of day. So, so from a trade point of view, that agreement goes. So maybe for the people that were burning rubbish bins thinking it was such a bad deal for New Zealand may have to rethink that, because if it was such a bad deal for New Zealand and such a good deal for the US, it would be unlikely that he'd be tearing that agreement up. But anyway, that's
I heard him last night say he was happy to trade with anyone in the world as long as they're going to treat the US well.
Okay, well,
as long as they don't piss Donald Trump off, we'll be okay.
There you go. So let's we'll see how it. So, clearly there's going to be, for a small nation like New Zealand that relies on exports for, for its a large part of its income, that's a concern. It's a huge market, and but look, these things always present opportunities. So, we've got the opportunity to renegotiate trade deals with the UK given Brexit. Obviously TPPA will more than likely sort of be. Won't see the light of day, and there'll be other trade deals that'll be done. But again, it's uncertainty, and these things take time. It's not, you don't just sort of jump on a flight, rock up to the White House, sign up sort of $10 billion worth of trade deals, do some duty-free shopping, and come home. It takes a little bit longer than that. So, it doesn't surprise me that the New Zealand dollar is belatedly starting to come off, and I think you could continue to see that. The Reserve Bank signalled that they were prepared if the currency didn't weaken. To take other measures. Now that could be further rate cuts, or it could be currency intervention. But what it does mean is that for the foreseeable future, interest rates aren't going to be going up in New Zealand.
Just on that, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, a couple of days ago, the banks were going, or a couple of banks put 3-year rates up 0.5. Is in all indications where the Reserve Bank was going to go down 0.25 like it has. What's the go with that?
Well, there's two things. There's the official interest rate that the central bank set, and then there is the rate that the banks can go and actually go and fund themselves. Yeah. And that difference between the official rate and where the bank fund themselves is the credit spread, and credit spreads have been pushing out globally, and the cost of funds for Australian banks has been increasing. So that's the reason why the nominal rates can go lower. And if you think about it, why the Reserve Bank have been reluctant cutters over the last 12 months is because they don't want to fuel the property market. They fixated with Auckland property in particular. But it's been apparent for some time now, certainly the last 4 or 5 months probably, that the credit spread pressure that the banks are financing is highly unlikely they'll pass those cuts down, which I haven't seen whether they have today, but I assume that they won't have with a 25-point cut. So effectively, you actually you don't fuel what you're not wanting to fuel, and you get to sort of address hopefully some of the things that you want to address, which is a lower currency and higher inflation. So they're sort of trying to sort of tick all those boxes. But I think from a New Zealand point of view, obviously a Trump presidency can mean trade slowdown. So the Reserve Bank said that they'd looked at the election result and they were comfortable cutting rates. They didn't say they cut because of it, but certainly there's some uncertainty there around what that means. I think also for there's again just as whether Trump follows through on what he said he's going to do, it'll be interesting to see whether a number of people in the US follow through with what they said they were going to do. And I think Share came out today and said that New Zealand property looks pretty attractive. So we might end up with a whole lot of B and C grade celebrities sort of turning up on our shores. So Mark, you might be
brush off my feet selling property to the new celebs.
You and the Property Ventures crew might be busy dealing with Share and Claude Van Damme and those types.
Excellent. I'm into that. Well, yeah, who knows? Immigration. I bet I don't know where the rules, what they've got planned in the next couple of years. But what the government have been talking about the next couple of years. I know it's 60,000, 80,000 people the last sort of 12 months of immigration. Some are saying there's been too much. I mean, the big thing about New Zealand is before yesterday, it's such a desirable place for people to come to. I get people buying property in New Zealand. And I go, hey, tell me why you're buying here. And they know nothing about New Zealand apart from it's a safe haven of the world. And that's what and I hear that from not only us but from other people also. That's the only reason why people are buying property down here. It's got to be good for us. And an election like yesterday's, who knows? Immigration from America might start going up if they're allowed to do that. I don't know the rules around what they're doing with that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I'm not an immigration specialist, but I mean, if you look at the general trends, I mean, the backdrop in New Zealand, it's a pretty good story. Like you say, it's a beautiful place to live. It's safe, it's secure. We've got a pretty good economy. I mean, things are going well here. We've got good employment opportunities, great educational opportunities. Quality property that even by international standards is still relatively cheap relative to markets with maybe the US, Europe, and parts of Asia where these people come. So I mean, it's a pretty good story, and if anything, the story probably got a little bit more gloss on it with what happened overnight. That makes a better place to come to, right?
Yeah. Hey, question for you. I was going to ask you what maybe the biggest concern is, but you've sort of been talking a bit about that. And there's so many unknowns with Trump. He said a lot of stuff in the last 2 years, and a lot of stuff he will never obviously do, and some stuff he might do he hasn't even mentioned. But China, would that be our biggest threat looking forward? With that, such a big partner of ours, and if China and US aren't doing doing business themselves, how's that going to, will that affect us, do you think, gravely or not as much as people were thinking?
Hard to answer that one because it depends on what ends up happening with that relationship. I mean, I think, US needs China as much as China needs US. So I think, there's lots of mutual trade that goes on between those two countries and clearly, it's beneficial to both parties. Now, Trump's been sort of more banging on about sort of levels of currency and currency manipulation, making it unfair. Now, I mean, if he goes down sort of, tariffs and that sort of thing, well then, and you end up getting sort of a trade war, that's not good for anyone. Perversely, it could be good for New Zealand because, they need to buy their goods from
trade.
somewhere, so there could be more trade. But I mean, it's the type of trade that we do that probably wouldn't be substituted with what US do. So I mean, it's hard to answer that one with any sort of clarity. I mean, what I would say is that I think, Trump as a president is a figurehead, just like any president is, and there is a bunch of people that below them that are advisors and industry specialists and trade negotiators and so on. And I think it's it could be a refreshing change. I mean, you've seen sort of Russia have responded warmly to to Trump's success, and I think Obama, who has been a wonderful sort of orator, but if you looked at sort of some of the things that have gone on under his presidency, you could say that there are a number of problems that are as a result of how they've managed the administration. So sure, it's going to be a very different sort of foreign policy and trade sort of relationship than the US have had with its trading partners. Does that necessarily mean it's going to be going to be bad? I mean, I think ultimately, well, if I was in his shoes, apart from having shorter hair, I would be I'd be trying to do sort of trade deals that were fair for both parties. And I think if you listen to what he said last night, I mean, it was quite a softening of that rhetoric. And I think ultimately, there'll be some things that he's going to change, like tossing out TPPA and renegotiating some deals, and maybe being sort of harder line on such things as currency manipulation and this type of stuff, which will create more friction potentially depending on how it plays out. But I go back to the point that I think it's a pretty symbiotic relationship between the US and China, and I can't see that sort of completely breaking down.
Yeah, oh, that's good to hear. And I think you're right with Trump. He is going to be more of a figurehead than probably other presidents in the past, because he doesn't have that experience or the political experience, and he'll rely on people there, and he's got to have their own set stuff without even knowing the consequences of it, I think.
Well, I thought it was bloody amazing. I mean, when you listen to what he said last night, that acceptance speech, it was sort of like he didn't want the presidency. I thought he was going to say, okay, well, look, see, I won. I told you I could do it.
Yeah, it was a
hey,
joke.
Hillary,
I've always wondered whether he was going to say that.
Well, I actually thought, watching it last night, I thought, wow, maybe he is going to say, hey, okay, Hillary, I win, but you can have the presidency because I'm actually busy doing my own stuff. But, he didn't do that. So we'll see how things play out.
All good. Okay, hey, we'll just finish up soon, but just while we have got you here, I'll let you have 2 minutes. This is your what you do, and some listeners here play with the share market or currencies. Maybe put you on the spot here. What's going to happen in the next 6 months, Pella?
Let me get my crystal ball out and look. Look,
we're not going to hold you by this. We'll let you
have
some disclosure.
I won't. I won't be giving out any specific views. If you want that, more than welcome to give the advisors at IMF a call, and we can have a chat with you about that in more detail. But look, I think we're in a really interesting phase, and clearly, what happens in US markets is going to set the tone. I mean, I think we're going to see a rate hike out of the Federal Reserve in December, and what that means for equity markets, not just in the US but globally, given how high equities have been over the last few years, there's definitely some nervousness around that. I think interest rates are going to edge up in the US, but I think it's going to be an edge up. To be honest, I think we're going to see more of what we saw in 2016 and 2017, and that is a Federal Reserve that's pretty reluctant to hike interest rates. So maybe we'll get 1 or 2 hikes in 2017. It's probably going to be a pretty user-friendly environment for equities by and large, so they'll probably range trade, but there'll be buyers on dips. Currencies, I think you'll get a stronger US dollar. I think that seems to be the general view, and it really depends then on what happens with trade deals and geopolitics as to what happens to commodities and what happens to places like New Zealand. I mean, clearly if trade starts freezing up, that's not good for an economy like ours. But I think there's certainly very smart people in the New Zealand government that are looking at these things, and I'm sure as we've alluded to earlier, that Trump and his advisors won't do anything too crazy. Maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but hopefully
we'll see. Yeah, hopefully you're right.
Hopefully that'll happen. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you don't. So the Trump election, when housing, you don't see that directly affecting New Zealand housing market at all at this stage.
I don't really have a strong view on that, Mark.
Yeah, I know it's not really your.
It's not really my area of expertise. I mean, I think house prices have gone up significantly. By and large, in the region that we're sitting in here in Auckland, if you look at sort of measures of house price to income, to me, it appears pretty stretched. Doesn't mean that I think, if you look at what are the dynamics that have driven, house price inflation, it's been good economic performance. I think tick, we're going to continue to have that. It's low unemployment. Tick, I think we're going to continue to have that. It's positive net, and with migration, tick, I think we'll continue to have that going forward. So all those things are positives. But at some point, there is a natural sort of elasticity between income and house price that's probably pretty stretched. So, it wouldn't surprise me to see, the market stabilise and maybe have more modest gains. But, if you look at traditionally what causes rapid decrease in house prices, from what I've seen and looked at, are really there's sort of the existence of one of two things. It's either higher price of financing, significantly higher price of financing, so the affordability decreases and people are forced sellers. And I think we'll see how the next year plays out, but I think given the Reserve Bank cut rates today, I think it's indication that we're not sort of, even though the market is starting to price rate increases later next year, at this stage, you're probably sort of more of a stable period, continuing a stable period of low interest rates. And the unemployment rate doesn't appear to go up. It doesn't look like there's any economic shocks coming that would drive that higher. So if people are comfortable in their employment and the cost of debt servicing is constant, then those two things, from an outsider, without looking at other things. But you've also got supply. That there's more land being released and more supply coming into the market. So supply should help keep prices capped as well. So I'm not super excited about prices rocketing up from here because I think they've had a pretty good run.
Pretty good run the last 3 years.
Yeah. So and again, if you look at any, well, certainly in financial markets, when you have periods of price increase, you tend to have periods of price stability or correction before prices carry on up. So, probably the best case scenario is a period of stabilisation. Worst case scenario would be a correction. But I think the drivers, as I've said, to my view, and it's my personal view only, the things that drive those corrections don't seem to be sort of omnipresent at the moment.
They seem pretty well with what my general thoughts are and other people that I deal with each day also. We're going to have a mortgage broker, I think, on our next podcast to see what his perspective of where things are anyway. So, very good. Okay, hey, I'd like to thank you, Matt. You've probably had a very busy day today with what's been going on, and I know you've got a busy night coming up. So, thanks for your time, and we'll put how to contact you on our website if anyone wants to see you here at IMF.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Cheers.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. Matt's a sensational bloke, and he has, obviously, as you know, an immense knowledge of the finance industry in New Zealand. So if you want to get a hold of him any time, he's an extremely busy man. But as you can have probably heard, he's one of the best with foreign currency. So if you need to exchange money of large sums to or from New Zealand, or if you like dabbling in the foreign currency market or share market, he can certainly help you also. So feel free to come and see us, and we'll put you through to Matthew. And remember, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, make sure you join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/PropertyVenturesNZ. And we'd really appreciate it if you could jump on iTunes or Stitcher and give us a rating and review. That would help others to come along listening to this just like you are right now. So until the next podcast, have a great week.